To use the Tween scripts in our project, we first need to import them. Now we do that through the objects panel. So we click on the plus, find helper scripts, and select Tween Manager. Now that will create a new folder in our resources panel. And after just a moment, we'll get something here in the objects panel. Now, the very first thing I recommend you do is to click on this and drag it all the way up to the top of your scene. That is just because as we add the various Tween scripts to our objects, they are going to rely on this Tween and Tween Manager to be running. So I just like to keep them at the top so that we never have to worry about things being out of order. Now, all these examples over here, feel free to just expand this. Look through them if you want. I'm going to go through a few different examples, but not every possible thing. For example, I won't go over the text alpha, so you might want to look through that. But we can go ahead and select this examples and just hit delete, and we will start fresh. So what sorts of things can we do with the Tween script? So we saw all those examples there. If we open up this Tween folder and look at Tween Types, we have a TweenTransform, which can move, scale, and rotate objects. We have TweenValue, which is kind of a generic thing. It's good for scripting or changing materials. Tween color will change the color of something. Tween alpha can make something fade in and out. TweenChain lets us connect various tweens and run them in a sequence or all together, so you can get some more complex motions. Then the Tween Screen Transform is very similar to the TweenTransform, but geared towards two-dimensional screen images. Now, each of these Tween types has various settings we can modify. So rather than kind of dryly list all those, like I just listed the types, let's start creating some movement in our lens. Now I'm going to start by adding a box to my scene. So I'm just going to search box. And let's add that. And I can see it here. Now, if you don't see it, it may be nested under your camera at the 0, 0 position, which is where your camera is. So you might just need to adjust that Z position. So just make sure you have a box visible. I'm going to go ahead and move it back so it's a little smaller. Now, to add a Tween script, I'm going to, the easiest way is to select my box, click Add Component, choose Script, I click Add Script, then I'm going to open up Tween Types, and let's start with TweenTransform. I'll click OK, and my box has disappeared, and that's because the start and end positions are all zeroed out, which is the same position as the camera. So I'm just going to change these Z values to -80, and then we'll go through these. Now, if we wanted to, we could put our TweenTransform script on our camera, and then we could have the scene object. We could then select our box to kind of keep our script separate from the object. But if you don't specify anything by default, it will affect whatever it is attached to. Now, the Tween name is not needed right now, but that'll be important later for things like the TweenChain or if we're scripting. Play automatically, we'll go ahead and leave that on. And then loop type, let's go ahead and have this ping pong. So loop, it will run and then it'll reset and run again. Ping pong, it will go back and forth between the start and end values. So let's go ahead and give it some start and end values just so we can see something going on. So I just have it going between -10, 0, -80. So these are XYZ coordinates, and then going to +10, 0, -80. You can see our box over here is going back and forth. That's great. This is the most basic way to just set between script is just set those start and end values. Now we have our time setting here, so we can go lower and it'll go faster. We can give it a longer time and it'll take longer to run. In conjunction with the time, we can also set a delay. So if I set my time to 1 and my delay to 1, we will have a wait, it'll run, it will delay for 1 second, and then it will run for 1 second again. So now we kind of have a more back and forth with a pause. Now the last two settings here, the easing function and easing type that we'll take a look at. This will determine the type of motion. So if we go to something like bounce, as our box moves, you can see it is kind of bouncing. This just determines the motion in between our start and end values. So linear would be a nice back and forth. Bounce was a little more stylized. And then these other ones are a little more organic looking. They kind of start slower or faster, and you can end slower or faster as well. Then the easing type will be if it's at the beginning, the end, or the beginning and end of the motion. We turn off our delay now with the linear in and out. It's just moving back and forth. So if this is the motion you want, make sure you go linear in and out. All right, so one last option we didn't go over yet is this is local. So we just have our box nested under the camera. Let's go ahead and add a head binding. And I'm going to turn off the face occluder, and let's just move the box under the head binding. So here we have the box is moving back and forth, but is now tracked to the user's face. So let's find someone where we have a little more motion. Maybe just back a little more from the camera. You can see our box is over there where the user's face is. If I turn off his local, now it's just moving in the screen again. So his local will make sure that our motion is always affected by the face. Another great use case for the TweenTransform is to rotate an object. I'm going to add a fresh box. And I'm just going to move that a little bit so we can see a little better. And I just want this box to rotate around an axis. So I'm going to choose the y-axis here. So if I turn on the rotation, I have the screen band. So it'll just kind of rotate around like this. All right, so I'm going to add my tween script. I'm going to add the TweenTransform. And now for the type, I want this to be rotate. All right, so we have this from to. If we open this up, we can also use to, which will take our initial position or rotation or scale and go to this value. We can start from this value and go to whatever setting we're here. Or I'm going to use offset here. And this means I can continuously add a specific rotation. So if I change my Y offset to 10 degrees, you can see I rotate, but it just stops. Let's turn on loop. So I rotate, but you can see it keeps resetting. Let's make that a little more drastic so we can see it better. So I rotate 45 degrees, but then I reset. But if I turn on additive, now I get a continuous rotation. You can see it's a little jerky. So I'm just going to change this to linear and then in out. And we have a continuous rotation here. And now the nice thing about using this offset is if I want to come in here and adjust my rotation off of the y-axis, I'll just reset my lens. Now you can see I have that Y rotation, but now I've set a different rotation to my object. So this is pretty cool. And then this also still works with the delay. So if we go a 0.5 time and the 0.5 delay, and now it's like the second hand on the clock. If we change that to 6 degrees, now we could create a clock entirely with the tween script, and this one would be for the second hand. Another area where the tween script is helpful is if we want to add a little more pizzazz to our buttons. So I have a really simple button here, just an OK, and I can click it and I could have it doing something. We're focused on the tween, so it's not doing anything right now. But we can use the tween script to add a little more interactivity and make it feel more like a real button. So I'm going to select my image. I'm going to add a script component once again. And I want the tween screen transform. I could use the tween transform, but it's always good to try the screen transform as well. And I want to affect the scale this time. I'm going to go from 0.5, from 1, I mean, down to 0.5. So we'll start full scale, go down to half scale. And then we want this to run when we tap, not when it's awake. And I'm also going to go ping pong once. All right, so that does is if I now tap it, it gets small and it comes back. So let's play with some more settings. Let's change this time to be shorter. And I'm going to change this to a bounce. Now, if I tap it, it's a little more like I'm tapping a button. Now, the motion doesn't need to be this exaggerated, but these tween transforms on the scale are a great way to make your buttons feel more like buttons and add that extra little bit of polish to your lenses. Now, let's say you have a more complicated motion. Let's say we want this box to go across, to the right, then down, back to the left, back up to where it started. Now, on the tween scripts, we do have that delay, so we can maybe calculate out all the delays. Or as an alternative, we can use a TweenChain to run everything in sequence for us. Now, before we can do that, we need to add our other tween scripts. So I'm going to add a TweenTransform. Turn it into a tongue twister, the TWs and TRs. And in this case, I do want to give them names. The TweenChain does need names. So I'm going to call this right. And instead of trying to figure out all the positions I want it to go from, I'm just going to use offset. So I know this first one, I want it to go to the right. So I have my box right now at -8, 8, -40. We don't care about the Z. So I want to go from -8 to +8. So that's an offset of 16 in the X, and then nothing here. Now I do not want this to play automatically. I'm going to go ahead and change this to a linear in and out, so we can get a nice continuous motion. And 1 second seems good. All right, so once that is done, I'm going to click on this little gear, copy. I'm going to paste that. I'm just going to go ahead and paste that a total of 3 times. So we have 4 of these. So that's my right motion. I'll close that. Now for the left, we want to be going -16. We can keep everything else the same. And for our up motion, our X we want 0. We want to go 16 up. Then our down motion, make sure you're renaming all of these as well. We want 0 in the X and -16 going down. All right, so those are our 4 tweens. So let's go ahead and chain them together. I'll add a new script. I'll come in here, find the TweenChain. And we don't need to give it a name, but the interesting thing about this is you can actually chain together the chains. So if you have something really complex going on where maybe you need 3 tweens to run together, and then after those finish 3 more, you can set up a chain of chains. But we don't need that for our case. All right, so let's just have this loop. Then if we want them to run all together, we can run them all at once. It doesn't make sense for us, but we have that option. Then recursive means that it will search the children of our box. So if we had multiple objects all nested under the same kind of parent object, we could add the TweenChain to the parent and then use recursive, and it would find any individual object and run the tween as long as the name matches. So that's getting more complicated. So let's just stick to what we have here. So we have 4 motions total. We want to go to the right. We want to go down. We want to go left. We want to go up. Now that we have those added, we can see our box is moving in a nice continuous motion, 1 movement at a time. We can also control material parameters using our tweens. So I have this pixelization post effect that I just added from within the objects panel. And it uses this pixelization material. So if I select that, we have this size parameter we can change. So we can make the pixels very small. We can make them very large. So this being like the resolution. We're at a low resolution, at a high resolution. You can use a tween to adjust this value dynamically. So I'll just go ahead and select the camera, and I will add my tween value here. So in the tween types, there's not a specific tween script for materials, but we have this tween value, which is a little more generic one. So I'm going to select that. And now it has a few different fields. So data type, we can use an int, a float, vec2, vec3. It's like the TweenTransforms are a vec3 here. Let's just stick with an int. And now we need to set the onUpdate callback. So we're going to change that to set material parameter. We can choose a mesh visual, which we don't need to do. We do need to select our material. Now we need to know the property we're going to change. So if I select this pixelization material and I hover my mouse over size, I get this little yellow tooltip that says property : size, all lowercase. And that is what we want to put in that field. And then let's say we just want to go from like 50 up to 300. So I'll come back to the camera, which has the script. I'll change this to size. And then I want to start at 50. And I'll end at 300. And we can see our transition happen. I can reset my lens, or I can change this to ping pong. And you can see it's a pretty quick transition. Let's change this to 5 seconds. Now you can see our material params are changing according to the tween script. And that is pretty nifty. So let's say you're working on something more complex and you need to do something else with that tween value. You want some sort of transition to happen, but you need to maybe transform your value or make decisions based on on what those values are. Fortunately, it is really easy to send that tween value into a script. So I'm going to, let's create a simple script. We'll call this callback because we are going to specify a callback for the tween script. And this is going to be really simple. We're not going to write any complicated logic. We're going to focus on getting the values into our script. You can call this receive TweenValue. And then it's just going to receive a single argument. And let's just print that out. Print TweenValue. And then once we have our script, we need to expose it. So I'm going to type script.api.receive TweenValue gets receive TweenValue. I'm going to save that. And then I need to add it to my scene. So I can click an object, click off of it. And if I drag this over to the inspector, that's a quick way to create a new scene object with my script. So here is my script. It's here. Now let's connect it to the tween. I'm going to come back to the camera. Let's go ahead and just add a new TweenValue script. And let's go from 0 to 100. Now these ranges are inclusive. So we will hit 0, we will hit 100. And let's go for a span of 10 seconds. Now on the onUpdate callback, I want to call API function. I'll select my script, so it's on the scene object 106. And my function is receive TweenValue. Now this function name is whatever you put right here. So it could be named differently, just make sure you get that. Now if I open up the logger, you can see that we are getting the different values. All right, so let's go ahead and add a loop. Now you can see that our values are going up pretty quick, but now as we get higher, they are slowing down a little bit. And that's because we have this quadratic out easing function and easing type. So you can change this to linear, or you could go maybe exponential for a little more fun with how the values change. And now within here, you can do whatever script logic you want to consume these values and work with them. And for our last example, we're going to go over controlling when the tween runs and start and end values. So I'm going to create a box, and I'll just use a script to randomly move it around the screen. Now I don't want it to jump there, so we're going to use the tween to transition it to each different position. All right, so the first thing we need to do is add our object. So I'm just going to add another box, good old trusty box. And here it is in our scene, and I'm going to add a TweenTransform. And I don't want to worry about where it is starting. I just want to worry about where it's going. So for the movement type, I'm going to choose 2. So this is essentially the ending value. It will take wherever it currently is and then transition it from here to whatever we specify here. Then I'm going to turn off play automatically. I'll just keep it at 1 second. And we can use whatever easing function and type. I'll just keep it as quadratic and out. All right, so we have this. Let's rename this really quick. So this will be the random box. And now we need a script to control it. So I'll call this box controller. And let's edit it. All right, so I need to import my object that has the tween. This does have to be a scene object. And then I also want to specify a few parameters for getting my random values. So we don't want to worry too much about all this stuff. This is just a quick example. All right. So I want to generate a random position. Return range times 2 times math.random. Let's subtract that range. So if we pass in 10, we'll get a value between -10 and 10, etc. All right, so I'm going to create a function called moveBox, and this is where we are going to do our logic. We'll get a new endpoint. So that'll be a vec3 because it's a position. I'll generate a random for the X, a random position for the Y. Then I'm just going to use the Z. All right, so nothing fancy, just getting a random position in here. Now I'm going to set that on my tween. So I'm going to go global.tweenManager, so lowercase t, capital M, all in word, and go .set end value. I'm going to say script.box. That is the object with the tween. Now I need to give the tween name because there might be multiple tweens. So I'll call it box move. And I'm going to give it the new ending position. So that is this variable here. Now this tween name, if we come back to my box, I actually forgot to set that. So make sure you have a tween name if you're going to be doing any scripting like this, because there might be multiple tweens. The tween manager needs to know which tween we are changing. All right, so once we have that, we're also going to call global.tweenManager.startTween. And it's going to be a tween on this box that we've passed in. The name of the tween we want to start is box move. Then we can pass in a callback. So this function will run when the tween finishes. And because I want to have this continuous, I'm going to pass in this function again. Now, after that, I'm just going to call it one time to get things started. And let's add this to our scene and see if it works. Just add that. I will get an error because we need to choose our scene object. I'll choose random box. And nope, looks like there is a typo. Once that's all fixed, we will now see our box moving randomly. Now that first motion, we had some Z motion because we weren't starting at -40, but now you can see that our box is randomly moving. Now, besides setting the end value, you can also set the start value if you want to have control over the start and end values. And you can pause tweens, stop them, resume them. There's full documentation on Luna Studio's Tween Manager page. There's a link to that in the description. Now, one weakness of this global.tweenManager stuff is we cannot change this time. This is not exposed to us to change. So if you knew what you're doing, you could probably go into some of these tween scripts and modify them so that you can adjust that time. But that is one limitation. Each motion is going to have to take the same amount of time. Unless you have multiple different tweens set up. Maybe you can have box move slow, box move fast, etc.